Get in the middle of this.
All right, and for those who know colleagues couldn't be here, we are gonna record this and I will post this on the counseling website. If you haven't seen it, on the bottom of the drop links, or the quick links on the counseling website, is actually a whole little page for teachers. This video will be on there, resources, templates, all that stuff for you. So if you haven't seen it before, please utilize it. Also tells you how to do a few things on SCORE, which is again where you're going to upload your recs and send them through. So that's kind of your little hub for all things teacher recommendation. But this morning we are fortunate to have Susan Migliarese. Oh, it's only taken me like 6 years to get that right off. I've worked with Susan several times to host these kind of events, just to help support you in the rec writing process, so that you know what do college admissions people look for, how short and succinct you really can be in this process to save yourself a lot of time, but also make sure that you're communicating to admissions what exactly they need to know about the students that you're recommending. So I'm going to turn it over to Susie in the interest of time. And obviously she'll speak. I also did ask her to speak a little bit about AI, not only from the teacher rec side, but also the college essay side, because I know some of you are English teachers. Just so you know, Susan, one of the assignments for the junior year is to write a college rec, which is an absolutely fantastic opportunity for our students, and we want to help them understand how they can write an authentic recommendation on their own.
Right.
So I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. As Dave said, I'm Susan Migliarese. I have been in college admission work since 1997. I've been at Boston College since 1999. So I just want to give a little bit of a background on kind of how we use teacher recommendations before I even kind of go into some of my thoughts about what would be helpful from our side, and hopefully for all of you, about how to get the most pertinent information across to us. But I think oftentimes one of the things we hear is kind of like, do you use these things anyway, and do they even make any impact on the decision for the students? And ironically, I said to Dana this morning, this is an odd day for me to be here because we released regular decisions last night at 5 o'clock. So I was like, I had probably over 50 applications from Needham. I need to get in and out of here. And I'm stepping in that. So, but I think it's really important to understand kind of how important teacher recommendations really are, even compared to when I started working in college admission in the mid-90s. One of the major reasons that teacher recommendations have become so much more vital in making the decisions that I do is how much more nuanced the decisions have become. Not just for Boston College, but I think for a lot of universities. When I started working in college admission, most students had a class rank, most grades were weighted, and most people gave me a GPA, and for most of the institutions I worked for, we required testing. Almost all of that is not true anymore. Almost no one ranks, certainly not around here. I don't even get bar graphs anymore. I have no idea where these kids are falling in the class. Zero. Now, I get 60 plus applications from here. I can figure out where they're falling in the class, but there used to be something that told you where they were. Almost everybody in Metro West is not weighting a grade anymore. You're barely telling me how competitive the actual classes are. You know, kind of everybody's great. Everybody does really well, right? You know, the amount of grade inflation's out there. None of this is anybody's fault, right? This is kind of where we're at. So to make the kind of decisions that I need to make, our accept rate this past year was 12%. It means that I have to really dig deep and try to understand how this student is going to contribute to our particular institution. When I'm making the decisions that I do, I always tell kids this. Most of them have done every single thing right. They've taken all the classes they should. They've done every single extracurricular. They've gotten good grades, all of it. So it doesn't come about like whether or not you're a good student, right? I mean, at least for the students that I'm looking at. What it becomes about is we are a very particular kind of place. We're liberal arts oriented, we're interdisciplinary in nature. You know, I need kids who are going to thrive in that environment, who really want to be at a school where that they can take art history and chemistry and figure out how they go together. So that's where you all come in, because you know them better than anybody else. Because they are with you every single day for a block of time, and you can really see who they are academically. And that's what I need from teacher recommendations. So if I could kind of succinctly say, what we're looking for is to, from you all, is to get a true sense of what they are like in the classroom. I would say that teacher recommendations are my eyes and ears in a classroom, because I can see somebody's grade, but how did they get to that grade? That's kind of what I need to get from all of you, so I can figure out if they are going to academically flourish in our particular environment. Is every university doing that? I cannot speak for other places. I would say that universities that are, most of us have seen such an increase in applications. Schools that are seeing hundreds of thousands of applications, no joke, I mean, NYU had over 100,000 applications. How thoroughly are they doing all this? I can't speak for that, but I can say for, certainly my institution and a lot, these teacher recommendations are helping us make that critical decision about who's gonna fit into our mission. So that's kind of how we use them all. I do read them incredibly thoroughly. They really are, my notes on teacher recs are quite long, because when I go back and have to make a decision, I'm gonna go back to that piece of what I'm hearing more than I'm gonna go back to what their GPA was. Because again, that is just kind of, a lot of them have good ones. So I can't take it off that. So that's a little piece of kind of like how we use all of these things. Some other things to think about in terms of how schools review applications. So it depends on how the school does it. The way that we do it at BC is that we have territory assignments. So, and we are a single reader system, which is a little unusual. A lot of schools have committee-based, where there's a lot of people kind of involved in the decision. Some places are a little bit more formulaic, where they're looking at just GPA, et cetera, when there was testing, and kind of making decisions based off that. The way that we do it is that each of us in the office, there are 20 of us who have assigned territories. We read both domestic and some of us read domestic and international. I've had a mix over the years. But my territory is all of Metro West, basically Wellesley over to Concord, Carlisle, and then I kind of go up North Shore. And I have a huge chunk of Connecticut. I got Fairfield County, Litchfield County, and tiny part of New York State, Catskills, and I have the entire states of Wyoming and Montana. I also, over the years, have had Nevada, Utah, Colorado, the Midwest. So we have territories that we read, and we have high schools that are assigned to us within those territories. So I off and on have had this area. So I had Needham when I first really began, and then I've had it for the last 6, 7 years when we kind of moved territories around a little bit. But what that means generally is that I actually, while I may not know you by face, I may know you by name, because I read the kids. I tend to try to read applications from school groups in a row. I can't read them all in one day, obviously, and they don't complete at the same time. But what I'll do when I read an application, when I have a reading day where I sit and just read applications all day, is I'll take 5 kids from Needham and I'll read them right in a row. Because I need the context too. Again, unweighted grades, no class rank. I need some sort of context of where these kids are coming from. So this is not atypical, and I'm throwing all this out there so that you are aware that if I'm reading in a row and I read 3 of your recs in a row, if they're exactly the same, I got nothing out of it. So it's a lot of pressure put on teachers. My dad was a teacher. I've been in education my whole life. I know how much you have on your plate. It is a lot to try to craft something original for every single kid who is applying or who's asked you for a recommendation. But I would encourage you to think of a way to do it. Because when it becomes a form letter, it just doesn't add to their application. It just kind of does nothing. It doesn't hurt them, it just does nothing, which is not really what you want to happen. So suggest, instead of trying to figure out kind of the professional way to do this and write the professional recommendations, which is what I think everybody thinks they have to do, that they have to write this kind of recommendation that maybe you would do for like a job, for, you know, to recommend somebody for a job. You don't need to do that. You need to write from how it works for you. If you are someone who is very prose oriented and you want to tell the story of the student and that is comfortable for you, then do that. If you are somebody who's much better at, like, I would like to bullet you their strengths and their weaknesses or whatever I want to do it, and I'm more comfortable writing in that kind of format where I put just like bullets in, that's fine too. I do not look at that negatively, that somebody has chosen to write a recommendation that way. It does not have to be a formal letter where to whom it may concern, blah, 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 blah. If that's your thing, that's fine. But if you want to do something a little less formal, that's fine too. It's much more important that I get good information than it's coming in a particular format. So that's what I kind of do, this is what I do. I kind of like blah, 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 blah. So if there's questions, people just shout a hand and I'm happy to answer.
So, I'm really glad you're talking about this, because this is something I've always been paranoid about, is that I know that kids are all applying to the same schools, and I'm writing a lot of letters. I have one paragraph that is the same in every letter that describes the course.
You do
Is
not
that,
need to do
you
that.
don't need to do that.
Oh my God.
Here's why. Unless it is an incredibly unusual course that nobody in their life has ever taught, I know what it is.
Okay.
And so do most college reps. I mean, I would say, I like to point out that I'm veteran, AKA old. So I've been doing this a long time. There are younger college reps who may not, but they are surrounded by veterans who can help them understand what a particular class is, if it's a little funky. But like, I always feel so bad for teachers who tell me everything about calculus. I know everything about that. I know what you taught. I know what this class is. So you don't need to do, you can cut that out of your letter, I think. Yeah.
I have a follow-up just because it relates
Yeah.
directly to Karen's system.
Sure.
I know it's the same class that she's talking about. But for example, like she's talking about AP Lang, like if our course is specifically designed around a like theme of equality and social justice, and we're trying to highlight about the student that this
Yes.
is what they're passionate about,
Yeah.
like because sometimes I feel pressure to do that because of the specific focus of our class. Is it relevant then to?
Yes, but you don't need to tell me how AP Lang, you can just in a sentence say, my particular take on AP Lang is to focus on social justice or inclusion or whatever. And what's more important for me is how did that, especially at a place like BC, how did that particular student engage with that? Because that's a huge part of the BC experience, is using your education to address social inequity. How did they do that in your class? What did they not? You know, that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to know, you know.
I also want to add, before we get to Gabe's question, every student's application that leaves here with a transcript leaves with a profile, a school profile. So an admissions officer can look at our profile and understand our courses, what do we offer, what levels do we offer, and things like GBP, and we'll end up putting on 9IP, those specific nuanced classes that don't exist anywhere else in the world will be explained on the profile. So admissions counselors have the student in context of the school and those unique opportunities, as well as the ability, they can always, if they really need more information, they can also go on the website and look up the program of study. So again, it's where you don't need that information to put that information.
I think the other thing teachers don't always know is our relationship, right? Like, I spent all of my day yesterday on the phone with counselors, talking about kids, what's going on, we release decisions, here's how rough it was this year, blah, 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 blah. So we have relationships, so that means that we understand what's going on at the high schools too. So you don't have to fill me in on that. I'd rather you use your time in a way that you feel is more productive than having to like write the same.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, my first question was, yeah, I also have the first paragraph, I think many of us do. And it's really interesting to hear that we should just write in whatever sort of form
Way that you
works
want.
best for us. My feeling, especially, I'm teaching different levels classes this year, but like I taught a middle of the road class, and if I had a kid who got, you know, a B- in a middle of the road class, I mean, I would say like, look, am I really like the best teacher to write you a recommendation? And if they said yes, I mean,
What do
I
I
would,
do?
well, I would write a middle of the road.
Right.
My sort of subtle nod to you would be, yeah, this recommendation doesn't really stand out. Like,
Yes.
I wouldn't say that in as many words, but
Right.
like, yeah.
That's legit, and that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So, like, I know that's, and super uncomfortable in a community where there's a lot of pressure on kids, right? Super uncomfortable to say, they're kind of a middle of the road kid. Couple things on all of that. First of all, you're not the only place where I'm gonna find that. I'm gonna see it in everything else that they've done. Right? This is not atypical where your rec is gonna should line up with what they're getting in class. My favorite is when I hear flowing, wonderful writer, and I've just read the essay.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, they're not. And you know they're not because they have a B or B- in your class. So that just doesn't, that's just not helpful because it's not truthful, right? But it's a lot of pressure for you all to be under. So one, I think just know that we get it in other places. And two, the majority of the colleges out there admit the majority of their students. The weird world is the one I live in, and I always say with BC, to quote my former director, John Mahoney, who's a legend in the world of college admission, Boston College is the least selective of the highly selective group. So we are the most selective of the highly selective, least is what I want. We admit a lot of kids. So even though it doesn't feel like it, and 12% is, we're still admitting thousands of kids. That kind of wackiness about the college process that drifts down to all of you, I think it's not on you to try to get them in, right? It's the work that they've done. And that we fight parents on this all the time, right? Like, I'm sorry you're disappointed, but this just didn't come through, and the competition set was this. And I think for you all, you should feel, I don't want to speak for the guidance office, but you should feel comfortable expressing the truth about who they are. There's nothing wrong with having some potential. Most places would very excited to take kids with potential, for sure, for sure.
I think, and the other thing which we kind of wrote in our missive, when it was sort of open season for students to ask, your goal is to write a positive endorsement for a student, and if you don't feel you can do that for whatever reason, you do not have to accept their ask. You can politely say, I don't feel that I can write a positive endorsement, or maybe there's somebody better, better suited or whatever. But if you don't feel that you can write a positive endorsement, or you have sort of meat to write on, you can decline them. Again, you're in the position of trying to support their candidacy. And if for whatever reason you don't feel you can do that, then you can decline.
What is that kid then gonna do? I mean,
Yeah.
that kid has come to you, I mean, that kid, again, is not an idiot, they know their situation, but they're coming to you to be their strongest advocate. They know they're not an absolute, all-star, but like, this is my best class, or this is my best relationship, or, so what does that kid then do?
Yeah, then you certainly can, say, then this is sort of my frame of reference for you. And if you're comfortable with that, I can, again, this is also if you have capacity, because you also have the ability to set whatever number recs you want to write. So if you say you're gonna write 10 recs and this is the 12th kid who's come to you, you can say, I've kind of met my capacity, or you can say, if you don't have anybody else, I'm happy to write on your behalf, and I'll do my best to speak to what I think your strengths are. I just want you to know that you might, if you have somebody else. And again, you're trying to write an accurate picture of what that student is in your class. And if they know themselves well as a student, they probably know pretty much what you're gonna write.
The other
But our
piece,
goal is not to throw them under the bus, is really what we're
true,
doing.
and I will tell you, at this point, I've been doing this forever, and how many recs have I read? Probably, no lie, probably close to 1 million, no lie, because of the fact that I read transfers too, and I read 2 recs for stuff. I can count on this hand how many, throwing a kid under the bus recommendations I've ever read. It just doesn't happen. So even if you're saying that, there are that's not throwing a kid under the bus. saying that they are in the middle, you know, they performed in the middle of your class and they have potential in this area, and that's not a negative recommendation. It's not. And again, particularly for most institutions, that's who most institutions are admitting most of those kinds of kids. It is the weird group, there's 30 schools in this country that are not doing that. The majority of the schools in this country are desperate for kids. The decline for the amount of the population that is 18 is rapid. So this is a huge issue for small colleges and others to stay around. So this is for about 30 schools. Everybody else is probably going to admit most of your kids. That's what's going on in the world.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here.
Sure.
This is really helpful. Joe, you were saying, I strongly believe that if I can't find something positive to say about any one of my students, then I should go sell cars, because my job is to have hope and see in people what they even don't necessarily see in themselves. So I always write too many. I wrote 53 this year and 53 last year, and you probably know my writing.
I probably do.
I always use the word apotheosis in it somewhere.
Is there a question?
There is. No, there is. There is. There is.
I like the collegiality.
The thing is, I'm encouraged to hear what you're saying about like more holistic idea of the
Yeah.
kid in my classroom. I also learn about all the other things that they do that you see in their brag sheet that they send along. But I try to create almost like a theme for the kid or a metaphor
Yep.
for the kid.
Sure.
I always feel pressure to write about their writing, so I'm an English teacher.
Yep.
And write about their thinking skills.
Yes.
You know, and that
That's
should
most important for me.
Okay, great. Glad to
Yes.
hear that. So I kind of
How do they think?
Okay.
Because I'm always trying to think, what are my faculty going to say? What are my faculty going to say to me if they get a kid in the classroom who's like, can't do it? That's where we're coming from. Like, what are they going to be like in a college classroom with faculty who are expecting them to think for BC across the liberal arts? That's what I'm always wondering about. And I mean, I hate to make this so specific for BC, but I think you can translate this. Like, think about an RIT or something, right? Like, they're gonna wanna know how specific in a science is somebody going to be able to handle getting into their science labs immediately at like an RIT. Like when I worked at Wentworth in Boston, I wasn't looking at English or writing skills, honestly. I was looking at how hands-on is this kid? What are they like? Can they do this kind of construction engineering? Or do they just think that they like this? And they've never been around it before. So teacher recs are really important when I worked at Wentworth, because like, how hands-on is this kid? So some of it is us also gleaning like what matters to our institution out of what you're writing. Just to your point about, you know, what other stuff they do, I would not spend a ton of time on that in your rec. Because I think a lot of teachers feel like they need a paragraph on how the student is as a school citizen. You do not need to do that. I get that a million other places. If you are connected to them through an activity, like if you're the advisor to something that they've done, and you want to say something very specific, not a platitude, they are wonderful organizational skills. You know, something specific. Tell me a story about how those organizational skills actually impacted what they did. That's super helpful. It's what you tell your kids, right? Like, you know, show, don't tell, right? So that is helpful for me, but listing of the things that they're involved with, I have that somewhere else, for sure.
Follow up,
Yeah.
I also have a section where they write an extensive research paper at the end of the year. That's why I use the word apotheosis. Like framing that as an issue and how that fits into their interests and their other things.
Yes.
You know, and also,
Yes.
is that useful for you?
That is useful.
Okay.
That is definitely useful. Yeah.
So I teach mostly sophomores and a few seniors, and over the past 10 years, all the recommendations have migrated to teachers of juniors, because we hear that's what you want.
That is not accurate, and we call that. I don't want to throw a segment of the world under the bus, but you all know this, right, that there are a ton of independent counselors out there, that there are people that families pay to help them manage the college process. You do all know that these people exist, right? Okay, so that industry, which has gotten much better than when I first started, to be honest, but that industry does have some kind of mythology that they like to tell parents. And one of the things that they like to tell parents is that junior year is the most important year, and junior teachers are the most important teachers. It's not accurate, and what I say when I'm in, like, at 12 o'clock today, when I go and do the information session, one of the things that I will say is, you need to pick a teacher that knows you well academically. If that's from sophomore year, that's fine. If that's from, kids say, can I have a freshman teacher? Yes. But, you have to think through the fact that you were very different as a first year student than you are as a senior. But if it's somebody that you've had a good relationship with, who knows you, and can speak to who you are academically and otherwise, then that is the person that you should be working with. It does not have to just be labeled to junior teachers. You can film that and send it out to your parents.
Yeah, make sure they hear it.
Yeah.
So I actually had another question, but then, so I sort of wanted, I thought I heard you qualify what you just said about ninth grade teachers.
I think the thing with ninth grade though is it's so long ago that there has to be some, like if you only have them in ninth grade and have had no relationship since, I'd have some wondering about like how current that information is.
Well, and why there
Sounds
isn't a
like
teacher
junior
from
Since
ninth
then.
grade
Yeah,
to
that's
junior
what it is.
year
Yeah.
that can't also write on your behalf, or has got
There's about.
more updated, sense of who you are as a student.
I mean, I will say, I'll use my niece as an example, and I grew up in Connecticut, a very tiny town, Litchfield, and her ninth grade math teacher became someone in her life who was just a mentor the whole time. And so Emily used her not as an academic recommendation, but kind of more as a personal recommendation in her application process. So that's something you can consider too, if there's a ninth grade relationship.
So, as a theater teacher, I tend to write more of those recommendations
Yeah,
because
sure.
I know students on a much more like outside
Yeah.
of school kind of basis. So is there anything you think in terms of writing those types of recommendations that stand out or are important versus academic?
I think those are more the social emotional kind of piece. And not that, because theater is academic and it is a major at BC, so it's certainly, depending on who the kid is and what they want, it may be more of an academic rec versus a more social emotional rec. But if it's somebody who's not planning a major in theater and they just want you as an additional recommendation, then I think that kind of how they've grown, what you've seen from them, certainly like in the theater acting kind of way, how they've changed, that's helpful too, because obviously one of the other things that kids are dealing with right now is all their mental health stuff. COVID notwithstanding, but social media, et cetera, I think hearing how they kind of handle challenges is helpful from that perspective. But that would, for me, that would be not an academic rec. Right.
Could you also incorporate, I have a student who is taking a similar course with a colleague, and we're both very enthusiastic about this student, and he's intending to become public service. Could I bring some aspects of my colleague's observations?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally fine too.
Yeah, we all can make glowing recommendations for, superstars.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about that, like, certain
Middle of the road
I'm
kid.
thinking like of another kid who especially, you're saying the truth will come out, like, it's there.
It's there.
So I'm thinking about, because you said you don't want to know about them as like a school citizen, but a phrase I often use is like, student is a good citizen. Like, I think
In
about
your
like,
classroom?
in my, like
Yes.
a kid who, could I be as just like out there as like, while their grades didn't always reflect, like grades don't always reflect the quality of the student's engagement in the class. Like,
Yes.
Is that,
If that's accurate to what you're
Yeah.
feeling they're doing, yes. And again, I don't think that's throwing a kid under the bus.
no, I don't. think so.
Parents might,
Yeah.
that might be the worry of parents, but from an admission standpoint, that's not, these are not perfect little robots. Like, that's kind of the thing that I think everybody thinks that they need to be. They don't, they're kids. Kids, we've all been doing this a long, I've been doing this forever. Like, they are human beings. Like, I'm expecting them not to be perfect in any way, shape, or form. What I'm trying to figure out is, are they a good fit for my school? And that's a different thing than, are they perfect? And I hope I get the blowback from that and not you as teachers. Like, my phone will be today, in an hour or so. How could you do this to me? And parent, I mean, I've heard it all for years. Because one of the things that we also say to parents is you have an applicant pool of 1. An applicant pool of 35,000. So they only see their child in that context, and we can give them a larger context. So hopefully, any of that blowback will come to us, and I have never once, when I've had a parent screaming at me on the phone, like, how could you do this to my child? I will go, did you see this grade? Did you see this? Did you see that? Did you hear there? I have never said, the teacher said this, ever. That has never happened. I will tell you, this is a good story. So, if anybody knows New York, sports radio fan, okay. Mike and the Mad Dog, okay. So, one of my colleagues gets a quick text from a friend saying, hey, they're talking about BC and the admission process on the fan right now. So, I don't read New York, but I read that area, right? I read Greenwich, et cetera. So I had a student that was related to somebody who was on air, had been waitlisted, and the high school had called me to just kind of say, can I get some perspective? And so I was talking through that particular student's writing style. That ends up on air. That the BC admission person probably should have been drinking her coffee, which I don't drink, and because they thought this, and this, and I'm like, oh. So the blowback always comes to us. It really will not come to you, and I have never once ever said that teachers had anything to do with the child not being admitted. So hopefully that takes some of the pressure off. And listing some weaknesses is not a bad thing. And we tell kids that too, right? Because they are not perfect, and they shouldn't be. They're 18, 17. Either you guys. Sure.
Thank you for coming. This is really quite helpful. I am an ESL teacher, often working with students who are newcomers, right?
Yeah.
So they're still on an academic journey as well as a personal journey. Should I be highlighting their past experiences or?
With English for sure, and the transition is really helpful. So just as an aside, BC's got an interesting thing going on. We are starting in the fall, well, actually in July, Messina College, which is a 2-year school. Actually, there are kids from Needham that I was kind of putting forth for Messina.
I'd love to talk to you about
Yeah,
it because
we
you just
can talk
interviewed
quickly, yeah.
yesterday.
Oh, good.
Love them.
I was not expecting kids from Messina from Needham, but I didn't think through like the different socioeconomics here. So just quick so that people are aware, it is a school for low income, like first generation kids. So some of your kids who may be transitioning over with English and stuff, it's a 2-year college. It is, I don't want to say it's open enrollment because it's not. If it's not appropriate for kids, English-wise and otherwise, they will not be admitted. But it's not like the admit rate to BC. And those kids, if they get a 3-4 after 2 years, they can leave with their associate's degree, or they can transition directly into BC. So it is a totally kind of philanthropic endeavor. But that's what I was gonna say, for kids with ESL, for Messina particularly, we definitely wanna know their background, what you know about if they did high school somewhere else, like what that experience was like and how that was helpful. So yes, and that's, again, very specific to this kind of situation, I would say.
Okay,
Sorry.
I have 2 questions, I'll be quick. You probably know my name too, because I write a lot, I've had juniors my whole career, but
Yeah.
I guess that whole repeating of phrases, I'm a math teacher, I'm
Yeah.
not great with words.
Yep.
When I write a phrase or a little paragraph that like I think sounds amazing,
You
I
wanna
use
do
it a
that
lot,
again.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kids that it would fit for. So I guess
Yeah.
what I'm saying is if you read 5 in a row, and 3 of them are for me, and you see the same phrase, but it's like a really positive thing, are you like, eh?
It's not that I'm like, and it just hasn't helped me see them in a specific lane.
But if it's such a good.
It uses apotheosis.
I'm not creative enough to think of a different way to say the
Say
same
it.
thing.
Do you have resources to help teachers with some of this stuff, or not really?
This is something we might, if not, we can get some. And I also think, you know, if you think about, you know, what does make them different? I mean, so if you're writing that sentence for 5 kids, what's the one
It took me
thing?
25 years to
There's
come
nothing
up
else to
with
write.
this.
I think you're worried more about the
I love how much
sentence.
you love this
perfect.
sentence.
Yeah.
I wanna use it.
But I think we all need this sentence. I'll tell you the truth, like, I will skip over it. Because
This is what I'm worried about.
Because that's, like,
Yeah.
in my brain I skip over it, because I just read it 3 times,
Yeah.
right? I have a teacher down in Connecticut, who writes 3-page single-space recs.
Oh.
Every time I get to her, I'm like, here she is. But they're forms. I know where to go in each paragraph to only get what I need. She spent all of that time, just even typing it, and I skip through it, because I know exactly, she has the same phrases, I'm like, oh, here we go. And I know what it is. I was a former teacher at XYZ University. And they boo, 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 and she says the same thing about it. And she writes, the school has 78 kids in their senior class. I get 30 applications from there. She writes probably 25 of the English recs. And I'm like, here we go. It's the same letter for 25 kids. It is not helpful, and she spent a lot of time doing it. So that's what I want to avoid for all
So I
of
guess
it.
the question is kind of, what's the thing that makes it, what is the 1 or 2 sentences that's unique about that kid? Right, every kid to some capacity has something that's different than the kid sitting next to them. And I think that even if you use that phrase for every single rec, because it feels like it captures them, what's the one thing that distinguishes them from the kid next to them is really what then you would latch on to.
Yes, and let me just talk a little bit about like length. Because
Yep.
people,
Yep.
yeah, when I said 3 pages, single space, you're like, huh. I mean, think about that. Like, I read it, okay? Do you think NYU read it? They have 110,000 applications. Like, maybe they did, God bless. But UCLA has over 100,000 applications. 3 tiny font, single space, it's a lot. So, one of the things that I recommend is like, a page is fine, right? If you are more than a page, or if you're putting your font so small that you're fitting it on a page, you need to edit a little bit. Because the things I don't need the stuff about your course, right? I don't need the stuff about you. A lot of teachers will tell me about their background. I'm like, that's not what they hired you, I think you're fine. Unless you're connecting it, very specifically, I don't need a list of their extra corrects. I have it 10 other places, trust me on that. I really just boil it down. Like, some of the best recs I get are just one story on a kid about how they were, that illuminated who they are academically. And I know that can be really hard. The English teachers are like, yes, I can do that. For other teachers, maybe not. So maybe that's where bullets are a little bit better. Like, we were discussing parabolas, and this kid came up with this interesting insight, and it showed how they think. Boom, that is super helpful for me. Like, quick narrative story tends to be, for me, the more helpful recs than a bunch of adjectives, if that makes sense.
Is it okay to be funny?
It's okay to be funny.
Yeah, we just
It's
tell
okay to
kids
be
not to do it in their essay.
And don't make fun of kids.
Yeah.
I want to
I
pause
wanna
for
make sure we have time
questions,
for
just
essay
because I'm
too.
aware of the time. I want you to just address AI, because that was
Yes,
a
I know
specific
that was a good
question.
question.
And then we can continue with questions, but I know that people wanted to know, A, from the essay writing, but B, from the rec writing, because again, if you use AI, then it might become a template, and then you're looking at 5 generic recs.
Right.
But
So-
AI in terms of recs from your perspective and also essay writing.
The only thing I would say with AI in terms of recs is if it's helpful as you're editing, I mean, I've heard that from, I've not used AI for anything, but I've heard from people that it is helpful after you've written something to run it through AI, and sometimes they help with it helps you kind of frame things a little bit differently. I mean, it depends on how you use the tool, right? Like, for good or for evil. So I think that's one of the things to think about for you all could it be helpful in kind of the more sharpening what I want to say. I don't think that's the end of the universe if you've written kind of the whole thing first. We have run our essay questions through AI. We let the kids know that. We purposely, when this all started to bubble up, I should point out that for BC, they write 2 essays. They use the Common Application. Common Application's essay topics are super broad. So I'm sure kids are using AI for that in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about that for a second. For the BC supplemental essays, we built those questions to try to be buffers against AI. They are incredibly personal questions, and they're incredibly specific to BC. So I have generally found, we don't think that there's been a lot of AI being used in the BC sub. And certainly at how poorly some of these kids do on it, if it was AI, it didn't help them. So, that's okay. The Common App, I think, is probably more where they're gonna utilize that. Again, I don't know necessarily how different it is than when you've paid a consultant to come through and do your essays and help you with your essays. Those were pretty apparent as well. They don't sound like an 18-year-old. AA doesn't really sound like an 18-year-old. I know, I'd heard through the grapevine that UVM, I don't know if they saw this question, they asked what Ben and Jerry's flavor you wanted to be or whatever. They ran that question through AI and then went, oh no. Because that's just too broad of a, like that, AI can whip out a bunch of fun things like that. So I think a lot of us did revamp our questions to try to hold that off. But I'm still of the mind that reminding kids, if you're not telling your story, you're not different than anybody else in this process. So I think telling your story is the most important thing you can do if you're an applicant. And I say this all the time when I talk to them about essay writing. I much prefer small moment. My daughter is in 6th grade, but when she was like in elementary school, small moment stories, right? Where you find a piece of your life that is not anywhere else in your application. I love that you played lacrosse. Do I hear you playing lacrosse over here? Probably not. But they do that. They do that a ton. And they all feel the need to tell me how this experience now relates to college. And I'm like, you don't need to do that at all.
It sounds like you're telling us that too, that we should write in small moments.
Yes. I find that super helpful.
Yeah.
And I think it's different than what most reps are.
Mine are more essay questions, so I
Yeah.
want to, if not everyone's an English teacher, but I want to make sure if everyone else has like general questions, they go first, but.
I'm just curious because I feel like some of the advice you're giving is very contrary to what we've heard in the past, like, having that like how much of this do you feel like might be BC specific, or do you feel like this actually works for like?
Yeah. I've been doing this forever. So, like, literally forever, I feel like.
So do we.
Yeah. So, I think you're gonna be different, and I think that's gonna stand out. And I think I read 1,800 freshman applications a year. I read another 500 transfers. I've read it, I've seen it, I've done it. No offense to other schools, but we're really veteran staff. And while there are certain things that are very BC specifically, I wanna see liberal arts and stuff like this, I will tell you, at independent schools, they've been doing this for years. So the independent schools write small moments for us, they do this. So, and if they're doing it for BC, they're doing it for everybody else. So I would suggest, I think you're gonna be more original if you do it, and I think it'll help your kids stand out. That's what I would say. But I don't wanna speak first.
And again, physics, geometry, algebra, they know what those classes are. If it's a really, really nuanced class like you and the law, whatever, again, they may know it, but even just one sentence and again, Greater Boston is indicated on the profile. So when they're looking at the application or the transcript and whatever. So we try in the profile to do that so that your narratives, you have time on your one page to simply highlight what is it like to have that student in your classroom.
I'll give you a specific example of somebody who retired at Lincoln Sudbury. I don't even read LS anymore, but there was a teacher teacher who taught a class on like world crisis at LS. His recs were so good because I knew what the class was. He didn't even tell me the class was world crisis, but he would talk about when they do a simulation, and he talked specifically about how the kid handled whatever the simulation was. That was the whole rec. But boy, did I get a lot out of that.
You wrote my sister's color recommendation.
Really.
My sister took that course.
It was, I mean, it was such a good rec, you know? Now, when I was at Lovely, they get mad, but I'm like, Dave McCullough also writes really good recs. So that's right.
But you're not that special.
Well,
No, he never even says that.
No, he,
Yeah.
this gentleman, he's an
It's a
English
graduation
teacher at
speech.
Wellesley, he wrote what ended up being on YouTube, a very popular, graduation speech, which was essentially, you're not that special. It was very well.
But his recs, McCullough recs are like 2 paragraphs, but they have everything in them. You know, zip, zip, zip. Got it. Thank you. Now, as all the teachers at Wellesley's pointing at me, but he's a writer. I'm like, okay, I know, but I'm just telling you, you don't have to do a ton if you do it well, right? Like if you can get me a couple paragraphs where I get a sense of who this kid is academically, it's really all we all need, really, truly.
And maybe one of the things, you know, if you agree to write recs now, is between now and the time that you write that rec, which maybe in June or whatever, or in the summer or in the fall or whatever, is now that you have that kid in class, you know you're gonna write for them, where is that moment that you think highlights them, and jot it down now, so that when you're writing, all you have to do is just say, oh, that day, blah, 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 and then you've got your example, so that you can think about it over the next 2 months or whatever, of what is that example that you wanna share, instead of having to remember it in September and going, oh, what was that kid like last year?
Sometimes I'll, I mean, I'm an English teacher too, so I have their writing to draw from. Sometimes if I'm talking about something they've done, I will pull a quote from something. How do you feel about that?
That's fine if it's not like half your page.
No.
That's something else that I abhor, from teachers where they didn't even really write a rec. They basically just pulled progress reports out. Well, give me the progress report. Like, in my progress report, I wrote, and then there's a whole quote of what they did in the progress report. Or that they pull like a page of what a kid wrote. I'm like, I have their writing sample. I don't need another writing sample from them. But if there's, like, this sentence blew me away because I've never seen somebody write like this, and then you throw me the sentence, that's totally fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I do.
It's the thesis of the research paper.
Either you guys in the back, you can find it out.
One thing I'm getting a little worried about is, as not a great writer, compared to some of my English colleagues who probably could write that narrative really well, am I doing them a disservice? Like, I proofread, I make sure there's no spelling errors, but there probably are still grammatical errors. Like, does any of that matter at all?
Yeah, your writing is.
I'm gonna switch to bullet points.
But bullet points are, like, if you are more comfortable with that, they are totally fine. Like, a lot of guidance counselors are going to bullet points at this point, you know, instead of like a full-out narrative. Yeah.
I think you asked this question, but could a less experienced person reading this in Arizona or whatever see that half page of a couple bullet points, see that it's, this teacher isn't that invested, this teacher's just, you know, ripping this off.
You have to give me the school. Like, I'm thinking University of Arizona, nope, they're not even care about that at all. Do you know what I mean?
Because there are too many applications.
Because a big state school that is not their primary focus. They are kind of, their focus is state mandated about how they make admission decisions. Same for UMass, right? Like, there's certain things that you have to do to be admitted to your flagship institution in your state, academically. So teacher recommendations are kind of like icing on the cake. They're not gonna sink somebody.
University of Richmond, I'm just picking something up.
Richmond?
Maybe they don't know
Sure.
Needham that well. University of Richmond.
A young staff member at Richmond, I know the staff there. And I know the director there. Mike would never in a million years be like, because Mike was a guidance counselor at, in Connecticut for a long time, and actually was at Rivers for a long time. So Mike would not tell his people, you know, this is 2 paragraphs, this isn't good. Like, if there's good information there, then it's good information. Yeah.
So I've written a lot of sophomore recs as of late, and I'm hunting down their junior teacher.
Yeah.
And how did they do? And then talking to the junior teacher, and I feel like I don't have to do that anymore. I just speak to them as about my experience.
Right.
Sophomores. So you're like.
It's not gonna hurt them. Now, if you felt like, if you have a relationship with a junior teacher and something like, the kid jumped a level, that happens sometimes, right? Like
Yeah.
languages, like, oh, and they jump all the way into AP or whatever, from CP. You know, and you wanna just quick touch base with that teacher and say, how are they doing? And you want a quick little quote on it, that's totally fine.
Okay.
I'm not saying you can't do it, but you don't have to do it to have an effective rec.
Okay, so like sometimes there is a change, sometimes it's worse, but I just. Do you know what
Sometimes it's worse. I would see that on their
trip.
transcript. Yeah. I think the most important thing for you all is how can you write the most effective rec without making yourself crazy, right? Without adding more to your plate. So figure that out for you, because there's no right or wrong way that I'm going to tell you. But I just want to tell you what I think you've all told yourself. I have to do all these things in order to have a good rec for kids, and that's a lot of mythology, honestly. The most important stuff is me getting at the meat of who the kid is academically. And how can you get that to me can depend on you and how you express yourself in a way that works. And no, I'm not looking at anybody's grammar, for sure.
I'm gonna pause right now because we're coming close to the end of CPT. I wanna thank you, Susan, for reminding folks that there's resources on the counseling website for teachers around the rec writing process. There's a template there to do bullet points. Use it if you want to. Use whatever else you would prefer to use. And if you have any questions, obviously see anybody in the counseling department about recs and stuff like that. I want to give people individual time. I know that they're like the EL and whatever to talk to Susan. But thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it.
And don't curse me if your kids are mad later tonight.
I just have an essay writing question.
Yeah.
So we told them kind of what you said